Bill's really two things involved in one. Most of it is about school safety. We also, and the second part of it is quickly right behind it is access to places for polling. Okay. There's a growing lack of places available for polling. We've just received word in the last few weeks that the LDS churches throughout the state will probably not be available for polling places anymore. If we want people to vote in person, we have to have a place for them to do so. Schools are typically located in ideal places, and all this bill does is it says that there will be no in-person instruction on the day of election, those 2 dates in May and November. I've heard rumors in the background, well, it's just going to give teachers the day off. No, it's not. Teachers will be there, administrators will be there. They'll either have in-service, they'll have data days, they might have parent-teacher conferences. Whatever the case may be, it'll just be that the bulk of the students will not be on those locations on those 2 polling dates. I will use a little personal experience here. My middle school, when I was the principal, was actually a polling place for all of Filer. Well, we had a gym, it had ADA accessible, and we would have all 4 precincts of Filer in that gym. We had students there, and I couldn't even close off that area of the building because 2 of my main restrooms were in that gym, and so I always had kids coming back through there, so I couldn't close that area off, had them there. And about the same time, we were cutting a hole in a wall so that all people coming to visit school would be brought back by the secretary. The secretary see if they had actual business there, they were a parent, or they were somebody that needed to be in the building. So she makes them there, but then twice a year, we just throw it wide open. Anybody in there wanted to be in our buildings, in our hallways, and we really didn't have very good control over it. So what I'm hoping on this bill is by not having the students there, we can have school safety. And the fact that students won't be there, but the staff will be there, and yet we open up more and more places for polling places to be available. Or even though there's a law that says schools have to be available, it'd be nice that they were agreeable to be available as well. So thank you for your consideration, and I will stand for questions.
Thank you, good gentleman. You've heard the motion. Is there further debate on the motion? Good lady from 11.
To speak in support of the bill.
Lady has the floor.
So coming from Canyon County, it really is an issue. And the clerk in Canyon County happens to be my brother. And so we have had many conversations. It isn't that the schools didn't want to let them use it. It was simply a matter of safety. And it was just becoming more and more challenging for parents to feel okay about school being in session, students there, and then having adults coming in and out. So he sat down with each of those districts, and he tried, and they were really, they tried to be accommodating. They tried to look if there were places that they could block off, as Representative Lanting was discussing, but they just couldn't. So I talked to the superintendent in our area, and she said that as long as they know in advance, they can set their calendar and they can get enough hours in, and that they really do want to be part of the solution. And so it makes it so that things can be saved, that people can vote, and we really want more in-person voting. And it just becomes increasingly challenging to find ADA compliant places. And Canyon County and Ada County were 2 that were actually under scrutiny for using polling places that didn't stand up to ADA compliance. So it is just really important to allow people an opportunity to in-person vote. It's supported by our superintendent of schools, Debbie Critchfield, and I believe that the superintendents that were talked to said as long as they know in advance, which is why it gives them a little more time, so they can set those calendars and allow for those 2 days that they would be in favor. Thank you.
Thank you, good lady. Is there further debate? Good lady from 34.
Will the gentleman yield to a question?
Down 25 yield.
Gentleman yields.
Gentleman yields.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and good gentleman. As I read through the language on page 2, I'm seeking clarification. Does the language allow for a school that is not needed as a polling location to remain open for in-person instruction that day?
Gentleman 25.
No, it does not. We were working out a directive from the superintendent school, or excuse me, from the Secretary of State that other buildings will be allowed for practice and things along that line. But if one building's out in the district, the entire district's out. Actually, the superintendents that I ever talked to, they prefer that. They would rather if they're gonna have one building out, they want all the buildings out. It's just too confusing for scheduling, busing, everything else. So no, they will not, all schools in the district will be out if any of the schools are being used for polling.
Lady 34.
Will the gentleman yield to another question?
Gentleman yield again.
Yields.
Gentleman yield.
So in follow-up to the statement that I just heard, does that mean that if a district does not have any schools that are currently being used as polling locations, then that school district can remain open for physical in-person teaching that day?
Gentleman 25.
That is correct.
Okay.
Thank you, good lady and good gentlemen. Is there further debate on the motion? Lady from 33.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Debate in favor of the motion.
Good lady has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, friends. I would hope you would just follow me, particularly some of you who may feel like I feel, in wanting to see some changes in election laws and why I think it's important to take this step. If we are desirous, some of us like me are desirous to see that 4-week period shortened. I don't like the fact that we can vote for 4 weeks. I don't like the fact that we can do such mass mail-in voting. Now, just bear with me here. But for those of us who don't like that fact, some do, this won't affect you. But for those of us who don't like that, if we want to see in-person voting, and yet we don't provide in-person voting, then you can't get rid of the 4-week voting or even shorten it. And you can't get rid of the mail-in ballots because one of the complaints, the lines are long, the people are waiting forever to vote. My district has been hit hard. We do not have the places to go vote. We don't. The schools have opted out. When I was growing up, every school was a voting place because that's where you went. They were in everybody's precinct. They were in your neighborhood. They're in your community. And that's where we went and voted. Now, my generous boss is allowing his private facility, which is an athletic club with a big gym, he's allowing that facility to be used because there's no place to vote. At one point, we had a couple of precincts there. But not everybody can do that. And I think it's very generous, again, of my boss. Mr. Speaker, we're hurting for places to vote. So the other problem, in years past, I happened to be a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Guess what? Our churches were used to vote. But they're not allowing that anymore. And once our church had kind of pulled out, others have pulled out for some of the same reason, not all of them. So we are short on places to vote. And so I would ask those of you who may be hesitant to support this, think about what your higher expectation is. And if you want to see some of these other things take place, you have to provide a place to vote. With that, I would greatly encourage your consideration, at least, for the green button.
You've heard the motion. Is there further debate on the motion? Gentleman from 4.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think
For what purpose is the gentleman rise?
I stand to debate against the bill.
Gentleman has the floor.
Thank you, sir. I think the greater lesson here is that we teach children that it's okay to vote. And I think separating voters from school children is a very bad example. I think it's important that they learn what the political process is. And the political process is that you go and you vote on election day. And I find nothing wrong with having schools open during polling. So I will oppose this motion, this bill.
Thank you, good gentlemen. Is there further debate on the motion? Good gentleman, 24.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I believe that this decision should be
Good
left.
gentleman, for what purpose do you rise?
Well, I want to argue a little.
Good gentleman has the floor. I like arguing. Let's go for it.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman has the floor.
I think that this decision should be left to the local district to decide. There are many schools where you could have this function, where you'd have very little interaction. And I think they should be given the opportunity to make the decision whether or not they would like to close the school or to continue with the voting. A lot of these small communities, it's just not a big deal. And so I believe that option should be left to them, so I would oppose the bill.
Thank you, good gentleman. You've heard the motion. Is there further debate on the motion?
I want everybody to vote.
Gentleman from 10.
Mr. Speaker, to debate against the bill.
Gentleman has the floor.
I'm reading the bill on line 25. There shall be no in-person student instruction on election days. That seems pretty definitive, and so I think this should be left up to the local jurisdictions to decide with the county clerk and the schools themselves. So I will oppose this bill.
Thank you, good gentleman. You've heard the motion. Is there further debate on the motion? The gentleman from 8.
To debate the bill.
Gentleman has the floor with his happy meter.
My fun meter is currently pegged.
I see that.
Let's do what we can to keep it that way.
Gentleman has the floor.
I think this is a great conversation, and I think that's a great idea that we use public buildings for the function of public voting. I think that's a great way to go. And in a lot of the schools, smaller schools, rural schools, communities, the biggest public building that we have are schools. And I really appreciated the representative from District 4 pointing out the importance of teaching students to vote. And I agree. And the way we've currently got it, where they're voting in other buildings, they're already separated. But so I get where you're going with that one, that students need. Is to provide an atmosphere that's not just safe for the students, but it's safe for the voters also, and it gives us the room. And when districts are deciding whether or not to let or to use their buildings as polling places, as the sponsor said, if they don't, then they can do other things, but they can have their in-person lessons. But if they do, it's the perfect time because teachers usually have 3 or 4 PD days, meaning professional development, or we might have 1 or 2 in-service days where we go to training. And we can do that on a Tuesday as we can on a Monday or a Friday. So the idea that there are days in the week that students go to the public schools in person is already there. We already have some days. It's not going to give teachers a day off. It's not going to allow teachers. Somebody came and asked me, if this happens, are you going to go out and electioneer? I said, well, no, because I'll be working. So I think it's a good idea that we use public for the function of voting, and it's a good use of public funds, and it's a good use of creating an environment where people don't have to stand in line for hours, and they don't necessarily have to stand outside. They could be in line in a building, and I appreciate your support on this bill.
Thank you, good gentleman. You've heard on the motion. Good lady from 30.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, I'm looking closely
For what
at
purpose is the
to
lady right?
debate against the bill. Thank
Lady
you,
has the
Mr.
floor.
Speaker. I'm looking closely at the language of this bill, and as the good gentleman from 10 stated, the language is clear. There shall be no in-person student instruction. It doesn't say if a building in the district location. This is every building. There will be no in-person instruction on election days in any district, in any building, the way I read this language. So if that's not the intent of the sponsor, then we probably need to look at the language again.
Thank you, good lady. You've heard the motion. Is there further debate on the motion? Hearing none. Oh, there we go. I can feel it. Good gentleman, 13.
I'd like to debate in favor of the bill.
Good gentleman has the
Speaker.
floor.
I can feel it. You can feel it. This is a deal where you got to think about in practice. I understand the politics about it and the teachers a day off, but you've got voting from 8 o'clock till 8 o'clock. You know, kids are in school then, and you've got people walking around the school campuses, elementary schools, things like that. You know, in practice, it's just not fair. You know, you've got these kids around, maybe they have to lock them down if they're in school, you know, because you've got people there, you know, by right. And I think the people that are voting in person want to vote in person. We too in Canyon County have had problems with voting places, as the dear representative had mentioned. I've talked to her brother as well. I've talked to my superintendent. You know, it's a safety matter. And in practice, you know, you see people pull up there, you know, in the creeper van and they're coming to vote, you guess. But the schools, you know, if the kids are there and the voters are there, they can go on campus. You know, whether it's a consideration of concealed carry people, things like that. I mean, you hear that, you know. You've got your rights as far as that goes, but it's a matter of protection. And you've got to think about how it works in practice. And in practice, in Canyon County, we stood in lines for a long time because we just had a lack of facilities to vote in. The early voting was not convenient. We had to drive to Caldwell. That was the election office, was the only place available. And this would not only allow voters to know, typically they know where their polling place is. You've got schools, I think, in all of the districts. It's very convenient. But to have the kids there, I mean, I've voted at one of our elementary schools for a number of years and just wondered, how is it we do this? Because you've got people there all day long, and you know, it's easy to think about the theory of it and the politics of it, but in practice, it's a much safer way for our kids and our voters. There's no issues dealing with that. As I understand that the sponsor has said that if there's practices, things like that, you know, that may still be able to go on, but as far as classroom instruction, and then everybody, all of the schools are on the same page. So everybody is confident that buses aren't running, whatever the case may be, but it standardizes it. It gives your teachers, your school district confidence as to what's going on those days, gives your voters confidence as to what's going on those days. It alleviates some of the issues with having polling places available. You've got education people that are for this. I just think this is a good bill. I'll be supporting it. Thank you.
Thank you, good gentleman. Good lady from 8.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would you put the House at ease for a minute?
Blanksma.
House will be at ease for a moment.
That was Miss Blanksma. Uh-oh, they're going to have a powwow. And on the back, Mr. Manwaring.
Not to do with us.
House will come to order. Good gentleman from 25.
After further consultation with leadership on both sides of of the aisle and some of the concerns of people calling me and others. I would like to pull this back to the Education Committee for a little more work to make sure we cover some of the bases that some people are having a concern.
A unanimous consent has been.
Unanimous consent, sorry, I missed that.
Unanimous consent has been requested to return it to the committee. Are there any objections to that? Hearing none, the bill will be returned to the committee. And the speaker would make one comment. That's the first time I've ever heard creeper vent on the floor of the gentleman from 13. You win. Thank you, good gentleman.